a next generation of virtualization, setting up the base platforms, the foundation to build out cloud. And once you really get comfortable with those virtualization technologies as a whole, and I don't just mean server, I mean the whole virtual data center, the storage, the networking, everything geared around delivering those services in a virtualized way. And really, a good concept I look at would be across multiple data centers. How many of you have more than one data center facility? It's pretty common. BCDR is not really an option for most organizations anymore. You have some sort of contingency plans, and that's typically either an outsourced or another type of data center facility. You still get the same quality of experience. You're not jumping as far into the deep end. You're going a little bit further with the virtualization technologies. I'd say this is the point at which it becomes your de facto platform for all production applications going forward, and somebody would have to have a fairly good justification for not using this platform. And I wouldn't just consider VMware and all the x86 platforms. If people are using mid-range IBM or Sun type systems, it's absolutely viable to do the different type of virtualization available on those platforms. Same goes for mainframes, and even fairly next generation of cell phones, you're going to see virtualization on those as well, and virtual desktop infrastructure. Although I tend to shy away from that a little because it's sort of a misnomer. The technology's been around for a while. I'm sure you've all heard of Citrix. It's been around forever. The virtual desktop infrastructure is really just a different spin on some things that have been around for quite a while. So that's not quite as new and interesting as the server virtualization. I'd also ask yourself, if you're not doing it now, are your IT people prepared? Do they have the right training? Do you have the skill sets necessary? There's an interesting combination of security, architecture, and also the advanced server and storage administration skills, along with the network administration skills to make sure it really works harmoniously. And in the end, I ask anybody who wants to go down this path, do you know what your business goals are? Do you know what platforms you want to put on these technologies? And how are you going to measure that success? And if that's sort of the litmus test, if you don't know how you're going to measure the success of that or one or more initiatives, then I'd go back and look at those planning steps first. So best practices for going on, and I know this is pretty high level. See the doctor, get prescriptive advice, talk to somebody who could tell you the specifics about moving in this direction, who can talk about virtualization and the things you're going to have to do, especially the caveats you're going to run into. What are their war stories from going down this path? I have a million of them. I'd be glad to hear yours as well after this. Obviously, the well-defined business goals, not just virtualizing to virtualize, not just a consolidation initiative, not just something the CFO said, reduce our data centers, but really as a business drive. I really feel that, and I've seen this so many times now, that done right, this is an opportunity to fundamentally transform, I know it's sort of overused, but fundamentally transform how you deliver IT to the business. There's more visibility, there's more flexibility, faster time to market, all the things that the other executives have been asking CIOs for well, pretty much since CIOs have become a title. It's really possible now. That's come to fruition. We really do have these ubiquitous platforms that you can leverage for that. A good technology strategy and roadmap, and that roadmap is going to include all your platforms, typically looking 6, 12, 18, and then I usually forget 24, look 36 months out, make sure there's a good understanding of where you're going. We'll talk about application virtualization again in a minute. I think Brandy's telling me I got to go a little quicker here, but I just want to touch, these best practices are really critical. The implementation, and included in the implementation is the engineering. There are some real specific areas of the engineering that are critical, especially in the storage. I can't tell you how many times I've seen virtualization initiatives flop because the storage wasn't accounted for. In almost no cases is a SAN able to handle, without some sort of change or some sort of re-architecture or some sort of alignment, work well in a densely virtualized environment. But well done, it can make all the difference. The platform transition, again, really important, especially if you have a large environment. Doing that P to V, physical to virtual transition, or the virtual to virtual transition is not an easy thing. It takes an immense amount of time and planning, especially when you're moving production applications that have SLAs and different metrics associated with them that you're responsible for. The ongoing management governance, having a plan for that in place before you start is really, really, really important. Otherwise, you'll get an immense virtual server sprawl, and I've seen that a lot of times, and it touches back on the letting business units provision their own virtual machines. Well, be careful what you give people, because if it's something good, they will use it, and that can often become more of a burden. And ongoing, just manage that change. Follow your roadmap. It will be more than some of its components. It's more than the network and the storage, and even more than the servers. Again, it's a way to fundamentally change how you're delivering those IT services. In the end, what you're delivering is just services and applications, and most of the rest of the business isn't necessarily concerned with how you deliver those things, but they want them better. And they don't understand that touching any one of those pieces, they're all interrelated components, so any piece you touch is going to inherently affect another, especially as you move to sort of this ubiquitous platforms environment where everything really is touching everything else, especially if you have multiple data centers, and for BCDR, you start spreading your virtualized functions across those data centers. So again, plan, evaluate, manage the change ongoing. So we'll talk a little about the compute, the storage, and the network resources. The server and application virtualization platforms, aside from virtual desktop infrastructure, I think it's good to look at the application virtualization. I wouldn't at this time consider it a primary platform. Most of them will be built on the virtualization platforms, but most of the application virtualization platforms out there today are not robust in the same way that virtualization platforms are. They're not comprehensive enough to run any app anywhere, with a few exceptions. So I would consider them, but I wouldn't consider them a primary platform choice. In the same way that I would have said 5 years ago, looking at virtualization as your only platform choice probably isn't a viable option yet, because it isn't quite mature enough yet. And I'd say the same thing about cloud for things like internal, like core ERP. If you were to not outsource the ERP, but if you were to take your own ERP, I wouldn't go putting that out on Amazon yet. But a lot of the controls and things that you need just aren't in place today, especially if you have compliance issues. The hypervisors, or just the virtualization platforms, I mean, you have a lot of different vendors. VMware, we're talking a little bit about the differences with Hyper-V and the VMware. Amazon and a lot of the others run open source Zen. There's KVM. There's a lot of different vendors out there. There's a lot of different styles. There's different types of pseudo virtualization. I wouldn't follow a path that anybody says what the right fit for your business is. It's really going to depend on what you're doing and what your goals are and what your financial model behind it is. Are you all about uptime? Is it all about your customer service? Do you have the right skills in your IT department to manage the technologies? Oftentimes, I don't know if any of you experienced it, but running open source software that's free isn't exactly so free. And that's why Microsoft software is still out there. I run both myself, and I think there's a place, but I think evaluating that is critical before jumping in and looking at any architectures or any validation that any particular vendor might give you. So, sort of